Hey everyone, welcome to Wildlife Inspired. I'm your host, Scott Keys. This is your channel for photography, for wildlife, and for wildlife photography. And today we're talking about golden hour. Now, this is one of the most repeated phrases in photography. You've heard it 1,000 times. Just shoot during golden hour and everything's going to be great. But what if I told you that golden hour was a lie? Well, in this video, we're going to break down what golden hour is and what it isn't. And I'll show you some images and illustrations along the way to make it all make sense, and we'll get to it right after this. Now, most people believe that golden hour is simply the first or last hour of daylight, the hour before sunset or the hour after sunrise. And that definition is simple and it's easy to remember, but unfortunately, it's inaccurate. Because golden hour isn't defined by a clock, it's defined by the quality of light, and that quality has to do with the sun's position relative to the horizon. Now, the warmth, the softness, and the directionality that we often associate with golden hour, it all comes from the sun being low in the sky. And when the sun is below the horizon, it's important to remember that we are in the shade of the earth created by its curvature. And if you're a flat earth proponent, I can't really help you out, but just know that as soon as the sun rises above the horizon, things start to change. And we start to see that directional or that direct light. Now, the light passes through the Earth's atmosphere. And this is where everything comes into play with golden hour. The more atmosphere that the light has to pass through, the more the light becomes affected. And this is particularly true of certain colors. I'm going to put a couple illustrations up here. The top illustration is going to show different colors of light, and it's going to simulate the wavelengths of those lights. Now, it's not important that it's factually accurate. What is important to know is that the red, yellow, and orange wavelengths are going to be longer, and the blue, indigo, and violet wavelengths are going to be shorter. And those shorter wavelengths are the ones that are most affected by atmospheric mass. So when light passes through thick atmospheric mass, these short wavelengths get scattered the most. It filters out the cool tones, and it allows the longer wavelengths, or the warmer tones, to pass through. And as that sun rises, it starts to pass through less atmospheric mass. So when the sun is right on the horizon, it's at the thickest part of the atmosphere, and it's going to filter out the most of those cool tones. Now, the golden tones fade, and once the sun starts to hit about 5 to 10 degrees above the horizon, the golden tones are essentially diminished. Now, there's not a rule that's set in stone for how high the sun has to be when it loses that golden tone, but for the purpose of this video, we're going to define the golden period as the amount of time that the sun is between the physical horizon and about 6 degrees above the horizon. Now, this is the sweet spot for the sun in this golden time period, and we're going to consider that the golden window. Anytime it gets above that window, the light starts to become harsher and it loses its golden tones. Now, if we define that golden window from 0 to 6 degrees and the sun starts to move through that window, you'll notice the light starts to change. It should be noted, though, that the rate of change is not linear. I'll explain that in a minute. When the sun first crests the horizon, there's a brief period where there's tones of red. So remember, red is the longest wavelength, and it's actually the one that we pick up first. It lasts very briefly. The atmosphere starts to thin out pretty fast. In between 2 and 5 degrees, you pick up the oranges and the yellows that we associate with golden hour. That's probably the true sweet spot for golden hour. And as it leaves that golden window, a couple things happen. The light continues to change and it loses that golden tone, and it also happens at a slower rate. Now, I'll throw a quick chart over here on the side. This is going to show you the air mass and the rise of the sun in degrees. And you'll notice when the sun is at 0 to 1 degrees, there's a heavy air mass. But as it goes up each degree, the air mass drops very, very quickly. This explains why when the sun is rising, the colors are changing so fast. And then during the rest of the day, it happens very slow. Once the sun gets above 10 degrees or so, the air mass is pretty consistent, so the light really doesn't change unless there's another atmospheric condition involved. Now, if I were to put this into the form of a graph, it might look something like this. This graph is only showing that it's not a linear change. Most of the change happens when the sun is very low because that's where the air mass is the thickest. And in that first chart I showed you that the air mass changes very quickly as the sun rises. Well, the light changes in direct correlation with that. So golden light It's a real scientific phenomenon. So why is this video entitled Golden Hour is a Lie? Well, the lie lies within the time, and here's where the myth falls apart. The amount of time that the sun spends between the horizon and 6 degrees depends entirely on latitude and season. Near the equator, the sun rises and sets very steeply. And that affects the amount of time that the sun stays in that golden window. As we move away from the equator, the sun's angle begins to shallow out, and the sun stays in that 6-degree window for a longer period of time. Near to the equator, golden hour can last as little as 20 or 30 minutes. In the mid-latitudes, like most of the lower 48 US, it can vary throughout the year, but it always falls short of a full hour. Now, in higher latitudes, like the Arctic Circle, the sun can skim the horizon for hours, and that can create extremely long golden light. Now, over on the side, I'm going to put 2 illustrations. Now, I took the time to make these illustrations, and I want you to note these illustrations are based off of real data. On the top, I'm going to represent Key West, Florida, about as far south as you can go. And on the bottom, I'm going to put a very northern location in the continental United States, and that's going to be Upper Minnesota. Now, when I start this illustration, I want you to pay attention to a couple things. I want you to look at the flight path of the sun, so the angle at which it ascends, and I want you to look at the amount of time that it's in the golden window below 6 degrees. And as I start that animation, you can see that in Key West, I've already breached that 6-degree barrier, and in Minnesota, I'm still going. So in Key West, on the exact same day, I got about 34 minutes of golden hour light, and in Minnesota, I got almost an hour. But it is important to note that even though this illustration or animation with Minnesota showed us that we can get a longer period of time, I can't get a full hour of golden hour. So in our best case scenario, in the lower 48 states, I can never hit that 1 hour benchmark. But there are some places where I can not only reach an hour of golden light, but I can exceed it. Let me show you that. So how do you find this information out? And how did I find out the time and angles for these 2 scenarios? Well, fortunately, there's a lot of modern tools out there that can help us with this. There are some websites out there, and I'm going to pull up a website called suncalc.org. That's the website I used for this information. And I'm actually going to break down Key West, Florida, in the exact scenario I just played for you in that animation. We can see the sunrise, and I can play around with the time of day until I find out where that 6-degree mark is. And in this case, it's around 34 minutes after sunrise. It also shows me the position of the sun or the relative path of the sun, and I can tell when midday is, and I can even tell how high in the sky the sun will be at its peak. Now, remember I said there are parts of the world we can get longer than 1 hour of golden light. So let's go past Minnesota. Let's keep going north. Let's go to Anchorage, Alaska. And I'll put that into the same website that I was just using, and let's look at some of the information there. And what you're going to notice is that the sunrise is much earlier and the day lasts much longer. And if I determine the time for the sun to get to 6 degrees, you're going to see that I have 90 minutes of golden hour. And again, that's on the same day that we had only 34 minutes of golden hour in Key West. One of the interesting things is that in Key West, the sun peaked around 88 degrees overhead, almost directly overhead. But in Anchorage, Alaska, on the same day, the sun will peak at around 52 degrees. Now, I was able to get all of that information from a website, and there are many websites out there that do similar applications. There's also some phone apps out there, and these phone apps can be really, really powerful. They don't just tell you when the sun rises and sets, but based off of the app, it might tell you exactly where in the sky the sun comes up and where the sun sets. It can even show you on your phone a simulation of where that sun will be at any given time of the day. Now, I find that really powerful at home, but I probably use it mostly when I travel because I may not know the area and I may not know how the sun rises in a certain area. And it lets me predict where it will be at a certain time of the day and helps me plan and scout my adventures. So if you've never looked into that, take a look at that. In fact, I did a video over on my subscription site that's over on Patreon. I'll put a link down below in the description if you've never checked that out. But I made a video that shows how I use that application to get a very specific image, and I think you'd be pretty impressed with it. Now, in all of the examples we talked about today, we assume that the areas we were standing on were flat. So maybe a grassland or a plains area, or maybe along the shore. But we also have to remember how the sun plays into areas with things like hills and mountains. And that's where some of those phone apps can come in really, really handy. I can remember going out to Utah for the first time, and I had planned out my day. And I looked at this golden hour calculator, and I knew where I wanted to be at what time, but I had never been there before. And what I didn't realize is that there is no golden hour for the first hour of the day because I was in the shadow of the mountains. Now, that doesn't mean I can't still be active, but it does mean I need to plan a little bit better in the future. So in addition to sunrises, it's important to know both the environment and the topography of the areas where you live or where you're going to be traveling to. So as we wrap up today's video, remember, golden light is coveted for its beauty, its color, and its tones. And when used correctly, it can make your photos really shine. Golden hour isn't a lie because the light isn't beautiful. It absolutely is. It's a lie because the name suggests it's a fixed amount of time. And once you stop chasing the clock and you start to understand the sun's angles, you gain control over the light and you improve your photography. So grab your camera, get outside, find some great light, and I hope we can continue to find inspiration in wildlife together.